Yeah. Mm, mm.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Agasicles statements from Gearworks.com and the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, as well as the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. Here with another episode of Off His Own Bat. This is a combo episode, Off His Own Bat, in conjunction with Steven's reviews of Ultimate Awesomeness. So, hopefully, kicking off the start to a wonderful podcasting relationship where he and I will be getting together every week to talk about comic books. So each and every week, Stephen and I both read anywhere from 4 to 12 comic books, and then we gather on this here podcast and talk about 6 of those issues in detail. We also then talk about the best thing that we read out of the previous shipping week, and then talk about what is in our pull list for the upcoming week, so that you are aware of what we'll be talking about on the next episode. Stephen, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm doing fine.
Good. Cool. So, starting off the first segment. So, first of all, let me mention this is a spoiler show. We are going to talk about the books in detail that we read the previous shipping week. We were talking about books for the shipping week of the 19th of September. So, if you haven't read your comic books, you should be done now. It's Monday night. It's 2 days before New Comic Book Day. So, we do the show this late so that hopefully everybody's had a chance to read. If for some reason you haven't, check out the show notes, look at the issues that we're going to talk about, make sure that you've read those issues, and then come back to listen to the show. Stephen, the first thing on the general issue reviews discussion is you read Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1.
Yes.
So you want to talk to us about that real quick?
Yeah, I could talk about that. The Amazing Spider-Man is Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1 is made by Saladin Ahmed, and the artist is Gary Brown. I'm not that familiar with the artist, but with the writer, I've read his work at Black Bolt and his Exile series, and I really enjoyed his Black Bolt, and I'm currently enjoying his Exile series. And I this issue was about Peter Parker's past with the symbiote when he just had gotten the suit, and he got in the suit, and he had just gotten the symbiote suit, and he's having a rough time with the suit because every night he's sleeping, the suit ends up getting ends up getting out and going on adventures like fighting villains or thugs, any criminals. While as he's sleeping, the Venom symbiote takes over and fights crime when he's sleeping, and that causes him to have stress and not function well with his girlfriend Black Cat and Aunt May, and his job with J. Jonah Jameson. So yeah, that's what's it's mostly about is something in the past, and I really did enjoy this issue because they had it was a lot of emotional experience with there's a lot of emotional experience with Peter Parker, with the stuff that he's going through, and not always on time for everything, and how he's not always stable with his life. Like he's very irresponsible, and he's hoping to do better, and he's like hiding a lot of secrets about himself, and it's kind of nice to see him go through that stuff, and kind of get a feel for the character, and you also get to see the symbiote care about people, and he actually you see he actually you see him kill a whole bunch of criminals, and I mean, I'm not sure if it's kill. It left it very vague of whether he's killing on them or not. He's just really bashing their heads open, and and yeah, the people were like questioning him. Why is he beating up the people? Like the people that he was trying to save was questioning him, and they Venom said that he needs to get things done, and this is how he gets things done. He's different than the usual Peter. He's different than Peter Parker because Peter Parker rather not kill anyone or beating them very violently. So there's this one guy he ends up saving, and apparently the guy teaches him a lesson to not kill anyone the next time he. Because there's one time where he gets caught by Hammerhead, the guy that he saved, and Venom goes saves him, and he decides not to kill Hammerhead because the guy told him to, and he said that he'll try to do better next time, and it was a good way of Venom the symbiote trying to be a better hero for himself, and it was a good story overall. I think it was a good story.
Very cool. I want to say so. As we talked yesterday a little bit in the pre-production show, I grew up reading comics in the '80s. I want to say this is a story that was told before. Like I swear, I'm certain there was an issue like this back in the '80s, telling this exact story of like the symbiote going out at night while Parker was sleeping, and then he would, but there because there was still a link, like Peter's mind was still awake while the symbiote was
Yeah,
out doing his thing. So every morning Peter would get up and he would be exhausted.
yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, I want to say that this is a thing that I've seen before. So Saladin Ahmed is kind of a rising star in the comic book industry. I think he's written a couple issues of Miss Marvel, which we talked about extensively yesterday as well. Um,
Oh, I didn't notice that. I think
I think he did. I was sure that there was also a book of his that I read last
because
year.
the only book I read was Black Bolt,
Okay,
and now he's writing Exiles.
okay, gotcha. So I may have him confused with a different writer. I also thought he had a creator-owned book that he was doing with a different publisher last year, but that might be incorrect. So overall, pretty good issue then, huh?
Yeah, I really liked this one. I would give it a 9
Nice, yeah. Because I'm not reading amazing. I am reading spectacular, which we will talk about a little bit.
I kind of wish he was actually writing the main series of Spider-Man.
So what is the main series now? Is it not amazing?
It is Amazing Spider-Man. It's just written by Nick Spencer. It's not written by this guy.
Okay. So
This
solid.
is this
He did the
annual
annual.
issue.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, well, very cool. So the next issue we're going to talk about is Batman number 55, published by DC, obviously written by Tom King with pencils by Tony Daniel. And the big story here for me is that this is Tony Daniel's return to a Batman book. I was accustomed to him doing the art on, I believe he did the art on Batman Eternal. And I haven't really seen Tony Daniel around DC Comics that much. And maybe he's been on books that I just haven't been reading. It seems I definitely see covers from him a lot. So I don't know if he's been taking a break and doing covers predominantly. But I just haven't seen him on ongoings. And like I said, I think the last time I saw him that I was on a book that I was reading regularly was Batman Eternal. So I'll have to go back and take a look at that. But at any rate, I've always been a fan of his work, and he brings it large here. Highly detailed work. Maybe he's my favorite alternate to Jim Lee. But I wasn't super crazy about the cover. There's some weird, like, proportion things that
Yeah,
Batman's kind
it
of,
does. Batman doesn't look like he's standing proportional in there.
yeah, so that was really weird for that to be an issue on the cover. But it made me a little nervous about like the interior art, whether or not maybe he's fallen off a bit. But the interior art was kind of standard Tony Daniel. Everything inside is exquisite, and we'll come back to talk about art here in a bit. So the setup for this is Bruce, and I apologize that I'm looking off camera. I have this big, huge noise isolation filter around my microphone, so I'm having to like look up and over it. I will have to try and set up my podcast setup a little better here for the future episodes. But so Bruce obviously has been wallowing in misery since the events of the wedding to Selena, or actually to Catwoman, I should say, where she left him at the altar. So we've been going through this for about 4 issues. First, we had 3 issues of him with the trial of Mr. Freeze, and him bribing his way onto a jury so that he could basically get Mr. Freeze acquitted, because he felt badly, because he knew that he had kind of pinned it on Freeze out of anger because he needed something to punch and something to fight. Then we had this really weird issue by a guest artist after that kind of did this whole setup of Dick coming back to try and kind of care for Bruce emotionally. And I didn't really, so that was issue 54, which I didn't particularly care for, because that artist, and not to throw shade at him, but I didn't like him as much as Lee Weeks, and I definitely don't like him as much as Tony Daniels, so the art was just a little off-putting. It was just a little too cartoony for me. And Steven has dropped off. Hopefully he will be back here shortly. So I'm going to continue, and hopefully we will get Steven back. So anyway, like I said, Bruce was looking for something to blame, or somebody to blame. Sorry, and I gotta. Okay, so Steven will be back with us shortly. His PC just crashed, so I'm gonna continue talking about Batman number 55, and then hopefully he will be back. Let me just tell him to. Not sure exactly what's going on with our technical problems tonight. Just rejoin when you are back up. Yep, so those kind of things happen when you're doing a podcast. They cannot be avoided. So, all right, good thing I put together all my show notes as if I was going to be doing a solo again. And of course, like I said, Bruce has been dealing with a lot because he was not in control when the negativity of the wedding happened. And if it's one thing that we all know, we know Bruce can't stand not being in control. So like I mentioned, we kind of had a cartoony, goofy issue with Dick, and a lot of remembrances that were touching at a lot of points, but again, I just didn't particularly care for that art style. Now we get issue number 55. So issue number 55, man, it's classic in a lot of ways from the beginning to the end. The issue is mostly Bruce and Dick on patrol, just like the old days, except now Dick is in the Nightwing costume. They encounter some mummies and a new villain who's leading these mummies. So it's kind of the same setup as the last issue. It's almost a repetition of the last issue, because the same thing, they brought Dick back and had him fighting alongside Bruce, and had him doing the same kind of quips. The quips are one thing that I didn't really particularly care for. I don't remember original Robin being that quippy. I mean, he was almost like Spider-Man level quippy, and that just kind of felt a little off-putting to me. I mean, I knew he was not as grim and brooding as Bruce was, but I just don't remember him being as much of a ham as they've had him be these last 2 issues. And then last issue, what they were doing was, in between the mummies, they were having the thing flash back to how Dick, or Bruce pulled Grayson into his kind of family unit, with him and Alfred. So we don't really get the flashbacks that much. But at the end of the day, the issues predominantly, for the most part of it, for the first 20-21 pages, is it's the dynamic duo. It's Gotham at night. There's rain. They're out on patrol, and that's pretty much all you need for the setup for a great Batman comic. So let's talk about the art first. So like I said, I'm a huge fan of Tony Daniels. The art here is superb. There's a elegant match between the art and the story, and King and Daniels working together again. Whichever it is, it just comes off with aplomb. And I'm curious. I would love to know the history between how this got set up as far as the talent and the rotation. So I don't know if I don't know if King set up this arc specifically to get Daniels back on the book, or if he knew Daniels was due to come back and he wanted to make sure that Daniels had a meaty, significant character impacting storyline to draw. You wouldn't want Tony Daniels to just come back for peanuts and rice. So I feel like King probably made sure that this was significant enough to ensure Daniels wasn't coming back for just another arc. But whatever it is, it just feels like, King is really setting Daniels up with very meaty content for him to get on board with. The very second page, it's a classic portrait splash page of Bruce and Dick running across the rooftops, and I mean, the only thing that could have made it more classic would have been if Dick was actually in the Robin costume. Then you get a splash page of Bruce and Dick in the air above the zombies they are fighting, attacking from above. Another classic splash page, this one in landscape view. Then you get a big, so it's like every other page, you're getting this big classic portrayal of the two of them as a dynamic duo. And if at this point you don't get that King and Daniels are setting you up for something, then you might want to check yourself because you might be dead inside. But I started getting nervous because I'm like, man, they're really pulling the heartstrings here with all these classic views. Now, what's going on in the background is you have a person, a villain, one-armed man who has come to town, and it's in a classic kind of noir. He's checking into a hotel. He's getting his passport checked, all that kind of stuff. But you get so like I said, you get a big portrait splash page of Batman landing the knockout blow on the main bad guy. So there's about 8 full-page layouts of Batman and Nightwing. And if this is the last of the 2 of them, then you've got that story, Daniels on art, and it's this big sweeping epic with big sweeping epic layouts, and it's absolutely just the right thing to do for this type of story. So again, a lot of this setup feels a lot like what happened to Tim Drake in Detective Comics. And with the way it ends, I didn't know exactly how to feel because we saw the Tim Drake thing, which, in at least one occasion was kind of a head fake until some things happened later. And so I kind of reserved judgment on exactly how I felt a little bit. But I quickly just decided just to accept it for what it was. I kind of did my own little comic book forensics on a page, and we'll talk about that later. So I was actually pretty amazed when I got to the final page that the whole thing hadn't been ruined for me by the internet. And if you got to the last page, it actually got the surprise and earned it. Good on you
Okay.
also.
Yeah, I got on.
Yeah, so Steven's back, very good. So Steve and I've been continuing to talk about Batman 55. I'm going to just continue chugging along with that, and then we'll get you back into the swing of things here shortly. So in Batman number 55, throughout the story, you see Batman and Robin being on patrol. We've got this background story of a man, seemingly Russian, I think maybe, who flies into Gotham, checks into a motel, goes to buy a rifle, socially engineers his way into gaining access to an apartment. All of these things are very timely and relevant with things that are going on in the real world. Gets access to an apartment which gives him the optimal sniper position, overlooking the rooftop where the bat signal is mounted, and then goes on to shoot Nightwing in the head. And of course, this is the final big portrait splash page after a comic book full of splash pages of Batman and Robin, or Batman and Nightwing, kind of in classic art poses from previous issues. Now, the question, of course, for everybody is going to be, did he really shoot Nightwing? Is he really dead? I think it was wonderfully done in terms of as soon as he shoots Nightwing, the camera snaps away from the actual shooting. You basically see in lettering what is essentially the equivalent of kind of background noise if you've ever watched a TV show where a shooting happens, and you see the next sequence of activity you see is the camera's off the actual victim, but you can hear all of the emergency calls and the vehicles and all that stuff in the background. It was kind of that same effect. Now again, as I mentioned, up until this point, so we don't know what's going to happen with Rick. We don't know if they're going to pull a Tim Drake. We don't know if they're going to kind of oracle him up like Barbara Gordon. Like I said, I kind of felt like I did my own little comic book forensics, and I kind of looked very intensely at the picture. I looked at the blood splatter. I looked at the way his head jerked. I thought about the direction that the sniper had to be sitting in. It looks to me like it's a real shot and not a grazing shot. But again, we just don't know how, issue number 56 is going to open up. Um, so, I love the final bit. And the final bit, you hear Gordon on the radio as the sniper, the camera's on the sniper's packing up and departs the apartment. But what you hear in the background, again in the lettering, is Gordon calling in the emergency services, yelling and screaming at people on a radio to get there as quickly as possible. To me, it's a really powerful scene. You've got some great craft. Very thoughtful to move the camera off of the rooftop scene and make the reader kind of imagine what it looks like with Batman and his potentially murdered best friend, and Gordon standing around in shock, screaming at people on a radio. So I was very satisfied with this. I thought it was excellent that they really kind of walk you through this whole character and relationship build up through the first 21 pages of the book. It didn't feel like a throwaway kind of thing. So again, it's just remaining to see, how they actually deal with it. Steven, you also read this issue. I get the sense you didn't have as positive a feeling as I had about it.
I didn't have a positive feeling about it because I didn't like I really don't like how Tom King writes the dialogue in the Batman books. It feels like the sentences they are kind of incoherent, and I don't know. They think the characters are speaking like they have speech impediment, like they're not talking in complete sentences, and I don't think. And I really didn't get to know as much about the villain as I was hoping, and I just didn't like the dialogue for the character, for especially for Nightwing. It was getting kind of annoying
So that's it.
with the mommy dearest, and
Right. Well, like I said,
that was just
I
I
too,
couldn't stand it.
I too had a problem with how comedic he was trying to come off being, and again, I have a hard time remembering if that was true to who he was as Robin. The somewhat incompleteness of the sentence I took as that being representative of the closeness of he and Bruce's relationship, right? That they didn't need. I mean, it's kind of like, your best friend or two guys when they're hanging out, and you have this short kind of quippy back and forth that where sentences aren't complete. So if you've ever watched like an episode of like Psych, it feels like that, where there's this bit of almost what I would call friendship jargon that goes back and forth between you two. It may not be complete sentences, but at any rate, I thought it was interesting and neat. So I gave the issue a 9 out of 10 on my personal scale. But Steven, let's talk about something you did like reading, Captain
Well, there
America.
was one thing that I did find, like on the on the comic websites, that I did find out what would happen to Nightwing. There was like a interview with Benjamin Percy, the guy who writes Nightwing now, and he said that Nightwing's gonna go through he's gonna have some brain damage. So he actually does get shot in the head, but he doesn't die. It's just like he ends up getting some brain damage, and if it messes up with him mentally and physically, because his brain can't operate 100% because it's a little bit damaged.
Okay, yeah. So
So
it
he
kind of
has to learn how to live with that.
yeah. So it kind of goes along with my theory that they were going to kind of oracle him up and constrain him somehow, and then he's going to have to figure out how to live his life and work around that. So that should be
Yeah. The only thing is that I don't know if Scott Lobdell is gonna uh take the opportunity and to demonstrate that, because Ben Parsley's leaving Nightwing pretty early, like at number 50,
okay.
and then they are switching to Scott Lobdell. So I don't know if he's gonna take whatever was written from Tom King and Benjamin Percy's on Nightwing's book.
Yeah, they're pretty. I feel like the Bat Family books, and I don't know if they're coming off the same. I mean, I assume that they're coming off the same editorial desk, kind of like Marvel
Hmm.
funnels people. But through the last few years of I mean, there's been discontinuity, like what Snyder was doing in Batman, in All Star Batman, was not necessarily in continuity with the core book and Detective Comics, but by and large, the things that are in continuity seem to be relatively in sync, or they give you kind of an expositionary hint of like, hey, this happened specifically outside the timeline of whatever. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll also be interesting because, as we know, Barbara Gordon is on her way back to Gotham after operating out in Burnside for the last 2 or 3 years, or whenever New 52 ended. That's where she transitioned to for Rebirth, and they are collapsing her back into Gotham. I wonder if this is part of that, overall storyline, that as we lose Nightwing and have lost Tim Drake, that it's Batgirl who comes back. And of course, Red Hood has also been run out of town, so the Bat Family is very small. Also, kind of feels like maybe they might be winding us up for a big Bat Family event, right? As a thing that kind of reassembles everyone
Yeah.
once everyone has been scattered to the wind. So it'll be interesting to see. But let's keep rolling and talk to me a little bit about Captain America Annual #1.
All right. Captain America Annual Number One is written by Tini Howard, and the artist is Chris Sprouse. And the story is it's about it takes place in World War II, and Captain America and Bucky are in the forest, and they meet up with three German refugees that has escaped Germany, and they're trying to find a way to get to America because they didn't want to live in Germany anymore. And they're one of them was it was two women, and one of them was Russian. 'Cause She was Russian, half German. She was a person that she had left Russia because she didn't like the way the Soviets were doing stuff, and she decided to move to Germany. And then she met this guy. She Yeah, she met the male character, and he was a half German, half Jew, and knew each other for a very long time, and they just didn't like how Germany was doing things, so they started to try to leave the country during the war, and they met up with Captain America and Bucky, and they're fighting off the Nazis, and halfway through the story, you find out that one of the male refugee was actually you find out he was a homosexual, and he talks about how he wants to come to America because he doesn't think that Germany liked him being a Jew or a homosexual, and he feels like America will probably give him a better chance of living. And he has a great friendship with the two women that's with him, and it was I felt like I don't know, I felt really connected with the story because I'm gay myself, and it was pretty touching to actually uh see that the character was pretty related to what I experienced, and he is kind of a symbolism of I know in the 1940s gays didn't have they weren't treated well in the 1940s, but I saw it as a symbolism of what America is trying to be, and I felt the story was pretty heartbreaking, and it was pretty enriching. I think I I would give this book actually a 10 because I thought it was like the best book of the week, and it was really touching, and you get to see how Captain America didn't even care about the characters' orientation or sex or race, that he still helped them out and treated them as soldiers, even though they were refugees escaping their country, and he took them as a person. Like some, it was kind of like what America is trying to be today, and I did appreciate that.
Very cool. So I guess one of my questions is, so how do you feel? I guess one concern I had, and I didn't read this issue, but it feels like every time we do a Captain America annual, it's always like a flashback to World War II with like him and Bucky, and I'm just like have we moved beyond that? I mean, I feel like that
Yeah,
should happen
they
more
always do
rarely.
that. Yeah, it's like every like annual issue is a
Right.
flashback to World War II.
Right. Yeah, and I get it, but I'm kind of like, okay, okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you, so now sometimes they do it and they do like the old style art, like they try and make it like Kirby looking art, or like they'll bring Mike Allred in to do it, so it has that old timey feel. Was it that style art, or was it like modern art style?
It's a modern art style. It wasn't no old timey feel. The characters did look very modern. They were it was pretty good. I like the art. I'm not really familiar with the artist, but his art was pretty good. It was the characters looked very solid. There was no everything was pretty much detailed. There was
Right.
nothing left undetailed.
Okay. All right.
It was pretty good. I really much enjoyed it. And the characters do end up going to America and live their lives. And what I actually thought was interesting is that the writer said that it's actually based on a true story that it was those the three characters are really his ancestors that fought in World War II who escaped Germany and got to America. So yeah, it was based on his family members' past.
Oh, nice. Very cool. Very
So
cool.
yeah, so I thought it was pretty cool to find out that those people actually do exist
Right.
and
Right.
they participate in the war.
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. So I'm going to move on to the fourth book in our rundown, Star Wars number 54, obviously published by Marvel Comics, written by Kieran Gillen, art by the great Salvador LaRocca, letters by Clayton Cowles. This is part 5 of the Hope Dies arc, wherein the rebels are given ships and technology by Queen Trios, only to be betrayed and given up to the Empire. So in the last few issues, the rebels, thanks to Han, have discovered that even though their hangar bay doors have been software locked from being opened, preventing them from launching their fighters, uh, the emergency feature to prevent the crash impact of a rebel spacecraft from impacting the hull door still works. And so the squadrons have been launching to take on the TIE fighters and Star Destroyers in the vicinity to give the rebel cruisers time to escape. Meanwhile, Leia and a small squad have stolen aboard the Executor, the big flagship of the Imperial Navy at the time, to get the override codes because the engines on the cruisers have also been shut down. The override codes are over on the Executor. They go over there to get the codes so that the cruisers will be allowed to make the jump to light speed. So on art, I have been enamored with LaRocca's work from the very beginning. I think he's been on Star Wars either since the beginning, or maybe he chopped in about issue 24 or so. I'm pretty sure. So there was before the whole, when Marvel first started the Star Wars reboot, when the license moved over to Disney, there was a prequel book to The Force Awakens that was written by Charles Soule, and I'm pretty sure LaRocca was on art. It was amazing. That's where I was first exposed to him, and then eventually, I think he rolled on to the main book. So he's been on this book for about 2.5 years, if I remember that correctly. One of the things that LaRocca does so well is that he makes the pictures, particularly of the space battles, look and feel like they're actually unfolding on a movie screen. If you look at the detail in his work, you will see when the camera is pulled out that the stars are points of light. But when you get in close on a fighter, it starts to become the fighter pilot's perspective, and the stars in the background become little short streaks. So it gives you that feeling of speed and dogfighting in a space fighter. You have one panel where an X-wing is launching out of the hangar bay in a cruiser, and he's got so much detail. He's actually got the vapor cloud in the hangar bay from where the X-wing was like buckled up to like its pre-engine start equipment, and then it like jettisons this whoosh of a vapor cloud and then takes off. When you're in the cockpit, you see these light shadows on Han's face as the lights from the hangar bay slide past him as he exits the hangar. It's just exquisite attention to detail in the work here, and it's great and epic. and there are big space battle splash pages, like in the second or third page, that remind me of like that scene in Return of the Jedi when like the Millennium Falcon and all of the fighter craft just race towards the TIE fighters that are coming up from the Imperial fleet, and they kind of all streak past each other in this big mass of like. I guess I've seen like the making of Return of the Jedi way back in the day, and I think they said they were like 50 or 80 like starcraft on screen at the one time, and it was like the biggest special effect shot ever. Um, and LaRocca does that. He renders that on the page, and it's pretty amazing. There's some neat little silent panels on there, and sorry, the E2KG Network Flock chat is going off for some reason, so let me close Flock. There's some neat little silent panels here, which are really effective, particularly in the moments where Vader has failed. And I always love that when they do that in comics, where like you see this Vader, he's this crushing evil, but then the rebels pull something over on him, and then it's just silent as he just kind of stews and steams in his own failure. And I'm sure Anakin is in there underneath the helmet getting angry, so it's really awesome. So Vader then eventually returns to the Executor, and while the squad slows Vader down by sacrificing themselves, so the squad that went with Leia, Leia escapes in a TIE fighter. She gets intercepted by Luke and Han. She blows up another TIE fighter to make sure that Luke and Han know that she's a friendly, because she has no communications with them. And it's just kind of these neat little story points. And the thing that amazes me a lot about this book, which I'm on now as an ongoing, for most of the books run, I didn't read it regularly. I would just do drop-ins. What's really neat is like every time I think, I'm like, they have to have told every Star Wars story that can possibly be told. They come up with these neat little things that haven't actually been done before. Like, we haven't actually seen Han in an X-Wing. We haven't seen Han in an X-Wing out in space fighting alongside Luke, which is neat. And when you really think about it, you're like, oh, no, Han's really a great pilot. This should have happened. And then much less Han, Luke, and Leia all in single-person fighter craft out in space, having the great big adventures that they've always had. One thing I really liked about this issue, too, in the last couple of issues, in the script, they've made these really awkward references. 2 issues ago, they did it like several times, and it was really off-putting. They made a bunch of references to Jyn Erso and her original rogues, and I was like, really? Do we have to force that? Like, we saw the movies. You don't have to shove that down our throats. So I'm glad that they backed off of that a bit. In the end, I just felt like this was more high adventure, great snips of dialogue, monumental one-liners from your favorite Star Wars characters. What I really like in this last arc, too, and especially this issue, is that you also get to hear a lot from characters that we love, but you don't see a lot of on screen. In the movies, they just don't get a ton of screen time, but you definitely recognize them, like Mon Mothma and General Dodonna. I gave this issue an 8.0 out of 10. Now, Steven, you also read this issue. What were your thoughts on it?
I thought it was pretty good. I really liked the character that was with Leia, that was fighting Darth Vader, and I did like that I appreciated that he actually sacrificed himself in order to save Leia, and I thought that was pretty touching. He was able to sacrifice himself for Leia to try to survive and run to the X, was it X-wing, right? No, that was an X-wing. It was a TIE fighter.
Well, the
Yeah,
guy,
he went to the TIE fighter ship. I mean, she went to the TIE fighter
right,
ship, and then yeah, I thought it was also pretty smart how Luke and Han Solo decided not to shoot the ship.
right.
'Cause he realized he wasn't sure it was Leia in the ship, but he had an idea that it was someone who was on their side. I
Right.
thought that was actually pretty smart.
So let's go ahead and blast through these last 2 issues pretty quickly, just because we got about 20 minutes left in the show, and I definitely want to make sure we get a chance to talk about everything. So you then read Hit Girl number 8 by Image Comics.
Yeah, I read Hit Girl number 8, and this is by Jeff Lemire, and the artist is Edward Rissell. And this book is about it's about Hit Girl going into Canada because there's drug trade w- going a drug trade war going on with countries like she goes to like countries around the world that's doing some illegal drug trading work. And the first couple of issues he was in Colombia. That was written by Mark Miller, and now the second arc of the book is written by Jeff Lemire, and it's she's solving the drug trade that was going on in Canada, and she still hasn't found out who's really been in charge of the illegal drug trade, but she did kill the people that were working in Canada. So she's killing a bunch of criminals there, and then she finds there was even some crooked cops there, and she gets rid of them, and then she uh she also deals with a whole bunch of emotional stuff about her dad, how much she misses her dad in her head. And you can see that she's a little pretty damaged about her father not being around in her life, and she's doing this all alone. And she's hoping that her father is still there for her, even though he's not really in there. So I mean, her father is talking to her in her head, and she's grieving, and actually I liked how the father actually talked to her like if he was alive and cheering her up, and it's pretty emotional to see her go through that and try to still be herself even though she's not clearly well. And it's pretty amazing how you see her fight, and the fighting scenes were pretty well done, and I really liked how the artist demonstrated the fighting scenes for the book.
Yeah, so you may have mentioned it, maybe I missed it. So does Kick-Ass show up in this book?
No, he's
Okay.
not. I think he retired. And I don't remember what happened in Kick Ass 3 of the book, but I think he retired because someone else took his mantle. And she hasn't met Hit Girl yet, but yeah, I don't think he's no longer around because they
Uh,
do mention he retired.
okay, yeah,
That's what I remember.
and I have seen a cover, I think recently, and maybe this shipping, the same shipping week of Kick-Ass, and it looked like it was a woman. So that's interesting
Yeah.
that they've made that swap. Very cool.
Yeah,
So
no, I'm just saying the character hasn't met Hit Girl yet, so there's no interaction as of yet.
okay, very cool. So last book in tonight's rundown is I read Millennium, the Girl Who Danced with Death #2, published by Titan Comics, written by Sylvain Runeberg, art by Belan Ortega, I believe it's pronounced, letters by Philippe Glogowski. Now, and I think Runeberg was also the guy. So the last big Titan book that's in a similar format to this was a War of Crowns, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. So this is the comics of the second trilogy, I think, of the books written or at least started by Stieg Larsson. Stieg Larsson started the books that kicked off with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and then I think partway through the writing of the trilogy, he actually passed away, and I think the trilogy was finished by someone else. This, as I understand it, is the second trilogy centered around the same characters. These books were popularized as movies first by Noomi Rapace in the lead role, and then later by Rooney Mara, who's Kate Mara's sister, and Daniel Craig as her co-star. All the names and faces, there's lots of names and faces. This is like a modern day kind of Game of Thrones. Maybe not that many characters, but there's a lot of moving parts to this thing. And they're all less important than the overall themes. This is definitely a book of themes to glom onto rather than, in my opinion, as important as a lot of the supporting cast. The main characters are Elizabeth Salander, who's kind of a social justice hacker, I guess I would say, and Mikhail Blomqvist, who is a Swedish journalist who writes for an activist paper, The Millennium. Salander gets involved in all sorts of skullduggery and with pretty much factions of every offensive socio-political movement afoot today. So you've got white supremacists, xenophobes, chauvinists, homophobes, gender supremacists, you name it. There's several plot lines going on here. One of the most poignant that I felt was one of a former member of one of these hate groups who has now seen the light and has gone legit, for lack of a better term, and who now coaches a girls' soccer team. What I think is a private school. So he has people of Islamic faith on his team, and part of where this chapter of the story focuses, this coach has started talking to Bloomquist in an effort to out a leader of a political faction for past crimes, because the two of them had been part of the same hate group in the past. And so that hate group, in order to get this coach to keep his mouth shut, they corner one of the girls he's coaching under an overpass when she's going home after practice one night, and basically beat her into a coma. And then call this guy and tell him, if you continue helping him out, or if you speak to anyone else, this is going to continue to happen to women of your team. So it's a very shocking, jarring, kick you in the ribs type of story. There's a lot going on here. The book is 62 pages long. I think it's about 50 written. And then you get some Titan Comics ads at the end that make up the rest, but it's really long. Now, just before this, I mentioned I read another Titan comic, War of Crowns, which was kind of the same shtick, where it wasn't necessarily an original comic. It's a translation of a comic that was published overseas, I think in France. And you would think that after reading War of Crowns, which was also like 60-something pages per issue, that I would be tired. And I was actually really surprised. I'm not. This book is not exhausting me. It's not something that I can't put down. Like when I was reading Star Wars 54, and actually Immortal Hulk, right? I started reading those books very late, and I should have gone to bed, but I was like, I couldn't put it down, and I kept turning the pages. This isn't quite that, but it's also not bogging me down in a 2 or 3 day read. I'm getting through it faster and with less remorse than it took me to read Newberry and Hobbs last week, which I talked about on the last podcast. Pencils in this are okay. They're professional, nothing really groundbreaking. What's probably more impressive is Ortega's work in colors, which feels kind of very metallic in color palette, but he makes it work. He does some great emoting in the eyes in scenes where the two main characters are in motorcycle helmets, so there's no other way that they have to convey any of their emotion except just through their eyes. From a storytelling aspect, he has a really good, kind of the big thing Ortega is doing really well is he does this very quick jab of violence. He does a really good job of conveying the motion and speed in that. And it's really brutal. So there are times when it's very there's a couple very, very quiet panels and everything seems calm, and then all of a sudden this very violent event happens, like somebody gets kicked in the ribs or smashed over the head, or stabbed or something, and it jars you and it takes your breath away. So there's that, and I kind of really like that style. There's a little problem in lettering where it often seems there are these scenes where everybody's just yelling and shouting at each other, and I'm like, I don't really know that this conversation would be going in this way, right? It just feels like just everybody is super aggro and is yelling and screaming at each other for no real apparent reason. And sometimes in the art, I will say Ortega kind of really overly does the lines in the portraits, in the faces, and it feels like it's just a tad bit overdone. At the end of the day, overall, I'm glad I'm reading this in the way that I'm glad I'm not just only reading capes and tight stuff. But I will say, one thing about the story is this. I mean, I read a novel like this too about a bunch of eco activists, and it was kind of the same thing. Overall, the story is fine, but it was every 5 seconds it was like an issue statement, and I get it, and it's a thing of the time, but I feel like you need to state the issue once, and then you just need to tell the story, and the issue will kind of come through. But admittedly, you've got to accept that this is an issues book if you're going to pick it up. But on a positive note, it's not on a positive note, but I guess overall that I'm digesting the issue stuff, but the book just doesn't give me enough surprises that I'm looking for. Again, the brutal violence thing, but now I'm kind of getting acclimated to that. And there's no kind of big reveal or a thriller plot twist, and I think this is a 3-issue limited series, and we're into the 2nd issue, so I don't really know where it's going from here. It's solid, it's just not exceptional. So overall, I gave this book a 6.5 out of 10, and that's where we are. I don't know, Steven, do you read big, epic miniseries? I mean, miniseries.
Yeah, I do read miniseries books.
But I mean, do you read big epic ones that are there's 60-something pages per issue, things like the Sandman stuff that's going on now, or anything like that?
I have been reading Sandman, but they haven't been that long. They were 20 pages.
Gotcha.
There was only the first issue, which was just an introduction to all the all
Right,
this series is running. Is they're gonna be ongoings. They're not really miniseries.
right,
Those Sandman books,
right.
and they've been 20 pages each issue. So
Okay.
I don't know.
So we're getting down to about the last 10 minutes. I think just in the course of the rundown, and this will not always be the case, but it is this week. The best thing I read this week was one of the books that we already talked about, which was Batman number 55. Like I said, after coming off issue 54, which I didn't particularly care for, um, and like I said, I also didn't really take too much to the approach of Dick being so overcompensating with the humor. And we get a little bit of the same thing this week, but at the end of the day, I understand it all a little bit more because it does make the contrast between he and Bruce more extreme. So there were other strong contenders for the best thing I read this week. Star Wars 54 could have been it. Immortal Hulk number 6 could have been it. But at the end of the day, I was just more emotionally impacted, admittedly with still some judgment and reserve by the way that the Batman book ended. So, um, so Steven, your favorite, the best thing you
It's
read this week was
it's Captain America Annual #1
okay.
because I felt a connection with the character in the book, and it's pretty interesting to see that it wasn't only soldiers that fought in the war; it's also refugees, and some of them were actually women or gay men. It could probably carry some different backgrounds, and I thought that was a pretty interesting piece of history.
No, that sounds awesome too. It sounds. I kind of regret not having read that now. Uh, my honorable mentions for the week, which for this show are the things that we would have given an 8.0 or above, or on a similar scale, equivalent books out of a 10.0 scale. So my honorable mentions this week, those shoutouts go to Star Wars number 54, Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 12, The Reckoning number 4, which was theoretically the final comic book issue of Buffy Summers, the Vampire Slayer, that will ever be written. Her story is theoretically done. And then also a shout out to Immortal Hulk number 6. Steven, what were your shout outs for this week?
I'll say Britannia Lost Eagles of Rome #3, which is a Valiant miniseries that takes place in ancient Rome. So there's like some Rome history in that book, and I also did like Doctor Strange #5 by Mark Wade.
Ah, very cool. Oh, so Wade's on Doctor Strange. Okay, very cool.
Yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
pretty cool because it's like a outer space Doctor Strange, which
Right,
I've
because
never
he
seen done before, and I wasn't sure this is gonna be an interesting idea, but when I started reading it, it actually is interesting. I
right
like it a lot.
because they rebooted him right before the movie, right, with Jason Aaron helming that series, and so they pass it from there off to Mark Wade. That's very interesting.
Well, it was Jason Aaron, then Donny Cates, and
Okay,
then Mark Wade.
okay, yeah,
Donny Cates had like a short run. He like I think only like wrote 6 issues,
okay.
and then they gave it to Mark Wade.
Ah, that's still a good. That's a nice string of talent that you line up back to back there. Um,
Yeah, Donny Cates wasn't selling well, so they had to
ooh,
change
okay,
to Mark Wade.
all right,
He only lasted like 6 issues, and they changed it very quickly.
okay. But Cates does seem like he's hitting his
He
stride this year, though. So
does.
maybe
It's just I think that was his weakest.
right,
Maybe his weakest. I don't like his writing, but I know it's a lot of people talk about him.
right, right.
So I it probably was his weakest run because they changed him very quickly.
Okay, all right. So last segment of the show before we get out of here, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering next week as well as what we're going to be reading. So first thing I'll be covering next episode will be Silencer number 9 from DC Comics, which ships this Wednesday, the 26th of September. All of these books are the shipping week, 26th September. Second thing I'll be talking about is Black Panther number 4. And the third thing I'll be talking about next week is Justice League Odyssey number 1. All of these are drop-in randos for me. They are not parts of my recurring pull list. The only thing that I'll actually be reading next week for my recurring pull list is Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 310. I've got to pull the thread on this because 309 just came out, and I'm like, is Marvel double shipping Spectacular Spider-Man? Because I didn't think Marvel was double shipping any books.
I don't know because I stopped picking up that series. I don't know how
Okay,
often it drops.
yeah, I'm gonna have to check that, and then I'll also be reading Punisher number 2 next week as well. Steven, what are you reading next week?
Well, I don't know. depending how good they are, I'll talk about them. But because there's a lot of titles I'm looking interested to picking up, and but these are the ones I'm most looking forward to. Is I'm really looking forward to Poe Dameron number 31 because it's final issue of the series because the series got canceled, and I really want to see how it concludes. And I've enjoyed the series. It's written by Charles Soule, and I've been enjoying the series ever since it came out. And I really like how he writes the character. And I'm also looking forward to Action Comics 1003, Domino Annual number 1, Doomsday Clock number 7, Justice League Dark number 3, Old Man Logan number 48, and Old Man Hawkeye number 9. That's about it.
Very cool. So is Bendis is on Action Comics now, right?
Yeah, I
Okay.
really like how Bendis is writing it. I've been looking forward to it since I Man of Steel. I really have enjoyed his writing in that and the Superman books, both Action comic books. I mean, Action Comics and Superman. I've been pretty much enjoying.
Okay. Very cool. Well, that completes our rundown sheet for tonight. Steven, anything else that you want to mention before we get out of here? Any plugs that you have to make for any other content that you're working on?
No, just I'm hoping to work with you again in the future for this podcast.
Absolutely, man. Well, as I mentioned at the outset of the show, you can expect us back every week from here on out, talking about comics every single week, 4 to 12 books, covering 6 issues, talking about the best thing that we read each week, and then finally talking about what we're going to be reading the following week. This will be our comics book podcast, which kind of, as far as when the show is scheduled, will kind of be the leadoff show for our weekly rotation of podcasts. You'll have this show on Monday nights, then you'll have the games podcast, which, as I mentioned on Enough to Keep, our E2KG deep dive that I just got off of before the show. We'll be collapsing the games podcasts into one show, so you'll have that on Tuesday nights. And then you will have the It's Another Thing movie guys podcast on Thursday nights every other week. And then Dave Pecci and I are about to rejoin, coming off of hiatus, as we begin our coverage of The Gifted, which premieres tomorrow night, actually, this week. He and I will probably be doing every 2 episodes, so you can expect us on as well in the It's Another Thing rotation every other week. Excuse me. Red Bull is making me a little bit gassy. So that's going to do it for us. Once again,
It usually does. Yeah.
once again, my name has been Agasicles from Gearworks.com and the E2KG Network podcasting channel, as well as the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. Here with Steven from the Ultimate Awesomeness podcast. Combining forces, thing ring, do your thing, Wonder Twin powers activate. He and I will be back here every week talking about the comics we love and the comics that we hope you also get a chance to read. Thank you very much. That's going to do it for us. We are out of here.